Aaron and Jacob Lively were the kind of twins people remembered. Same blue eyes, same lean frame, same easy laugh. They grew up just 30 minutes from Springer Mountain, Georgia, and spent most weekends on its trails since they were 12. By 19, they knew the Appalachian woods better than most adults who passed through. On March 17, 2018, they set out for what was supposed to be a simple overnight hike, nothing risky, just two brothers retracing part of a childhood route before Jacob left for college in the fall. Their mother, Dana, waved them off from the driveway that Saturday morning. She didn't know it would be the last time she'd see them. The plan was clear. Start from the Springer Mountain trailhead by 9 a.m., loop southeast through a 5-mile ridge, spend the night at a designated campsite, and return by midday Sunday where their father, Roy, would pick them up at a nearby gravel pullout. They packed light, 2 40-liter packs, water filters, protein bars, thermal blankets, a compact tent, and 2 charged phones. Aaron left a laminated itinerary on the kitchen counter. Times, coordinates, emergency contacts. It was the kind of thing that made parents breathe easier. For the Livelies, it would soon become a timeline of panic. Sunday afternoon came and went, no sign of the boys. By dusk, Roy had circled the trail access roads 3 times, no texts, no missed calls. The weather was clear, no rain or wind. He waited until 7 p.m., then drove straight to the county ranger station. Within the hour, 2 officers were dispatched to the trailhead. Their flashlight beams sliced through the darkening forest, but found no sign of recent movement, no rustling, no gear, no voices. By morning, a formal search and rescue operation had begun. Helicopters buzzed low across the ridgeline, while volunteers, scent dogs, and mounted patrols began combing the trail segments. It was a methodical grid sweep, timed by the hour, marking off sectors. And yet, by the end of that day, they had found only one thing, an empty, pristine campsite at a spot roughly matching the itinerary. The fire ring was untouched, no ashes. The tent was still packed in its bag, leaning against a flat rock. 2 water bottles sat on a log, both full, and on top of the food container was a plastic map folder with no weather damage. It looked staged or never used, as if the boys had set it up and never stayed. The only disturbance came about 30 feet east, where a narrow game trail dipped into a low thicket near a creek. There, muddy impressions, possibly footprints, were found, but they overlapped with other hikers' marks and led nowhere. A shallow indentation by the water could have been from a knee or a hand, but without drag marks or personal items, there was no story to tell. The creek itself was calm, waist-deep in some spots, ankle-deep in others. Divers went in anyway, turning over rocks, checking under log jams, but found nothing. No shoes, no phones, no torn fabric, just cold running water. What made the sight more unsettling was what wasn't there. No wrappers, no trail mix crumbs, no trace of cooking or eating. There were no fingerprints on the food tin, not even partials. Investigators would later confirm that the boys had packed the exact brand of thermal blanket left in the tent bag, but it had never been used. Which begged the question, if they didn't camp, why was everything unpacked? And if they did camp, why did they leave everything behind? Their phones, which had last pinged at 4:12 p.m. on Saturday near the creek bend, offered no further location data. Both shut off within 10 minutes of each other. No outgoing texts, no social media posts, no photos. Rangers scoured cell towers, contacted nearby hikers, and even pulled wildlife cam footage from the trail access roads. There were no sightings after 2 p.m. that day. The boys had simply vanished within a 3-hour window, in daylight, on a trail they knew better than anyone. By day 3, local news outlets picked up the story. Twin hikers missing on Appalachian Trail. Volunteers arrived in droves. Some believed they had fallen and were injured off-trail. Others speculated about bear attacks, but no sign of struggle or blood supported that theory. Rumors spread that maybe they had planned this, run away. Staged it, but anyone who knew Aaron and Jacob doubted it. They had jobs lined up for the summer. Jacob had been accepted to Georgia State. Aaron was saving for a car. They had left their wallets, their cash, their jackets. Who runs away with nothing? Search operations continued for 7 days before scaling back. Then they resumed intermittently for another month, but nothing new emerged, not a shoe print, not a thread, not even litter. Investigators quietly marked the site as initially undisturbed, and over time, locals stopped visiting the area altogether. Donna and Roy Lively, though, returned every Sunday for the next 3 years, placing notes in plastic bags beneath the same tree. Each one read the same thing. "We're here. We haven't stopped looking." The first real lead wouldn't come for another 11 months, and it would raise more questions than it answered. The search began before dawn on March 19th. With no sign of Aaron and Jacob by Monday morning, authorities initiated the first official grid sweep of the Springer Mountain Trail sector. At 7:02 a.m., a low-flying chopper made its first pass over the ridgeline, while ground teams coordinated movement along intersecting trails. Search and Rescue Command designated the Lively case as a Category 2, experienced missing hikers, no contact over 24 hours, no known distress signal. That classification came with urgency. It also came with assumptions. They're probably off-trail, disoriented, maybe injured. But early efforts revealed something far stranger. There were no disturbances, no rustled foliage, no footprints, nothing broken or bent in a way that made sense for 2 teenage boys to simply disappear. The campsite found the day before remained the only fixed reference point. Rangers expanded outward in concentric loops using GPS mapping, starting at the creek bend where both phones last pinged. Scent dogs were deployed. 1 bloodhound and 2 German shepherds rotated in shifts to avoid scent overlap. They picked up a trail briefly near the south-facing hill, then lost it entirely by a mossy incline. A small flag was placed at the spot. Later, a deputy would say the dogs reacted strong for 10 feet, then went blank like the trail just evaporated. Searchers marked it, logged it, moved on. By midday, volunteers had arrived from neighboring counties, hikers who knew the terrain. Trail runners, a local scout troop leader. They combed the underbrush, shouted the boys' names into ravines, scanned deer trails and side clearings. It was the kind of operation that usually turned up something, at least a dropped glove, a wrapper, a snapped branch. But each team radioed in the same status: negative, 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 no sign of human passage, only the echoes of their own boots and the heavy silence of the woods. Drone footage was inconclusive. Night vision-equipped units were flown twice in the evening hours over the 12-mile radius surrounding the creek, hoping heat signatures would register in denser areas. But forest canopies blocked most readings, a few flashes of animal movement, nothing human. A set of footprints found on a northern bluff looked promising at first, until they were matched to a solo backpacker with a satellite beacon who'd passed through 2 hours before the boys ever arrived. His GoPro footage confirmed he never saw them. For Dana and Roy, each day brought more disorientation than the last. They printed 500 flyers in town, plastered them in shops, diners, ranger stations. A local church group helped tape laminated copies on trail signs. Dinah kept returning to the trailhead, often alone, just staring into the woods as if sound or movement might return her sons. On the 3rd day, a reporter asked if she believed they had run away. She didn't answer, just turned back toward the trees. But others were more vocal. A few online commenters claimed the twins had been acting strange lately, withdrawn, secretive. Someone posted a vague comment about van life and starting over. None of it could be verified. Most of it was noise. By the 4th day, the FBI briefly stepped in, not under foul play suspicion, but due to the sheer scale of the missing person operation across state-protected land. They reviewed the digital trail, phone records, social media posts, text history. The final text from Jacob had been a meme sent to a friend at 1:03 p.m. Saturday. Nothing alarming. Aaron's last message was to their father at 1:17 p.m. A thumbs-up emoji responding to, "Let me know if you need anything." Nothing after that. Their phone batteries were estimated to have died or been shut off just after 4 p.m. On the 5th day, a ranger named Elena Rooks filed a report most investigators dismissed at the time. During the night patrol on March 20th, she'd been stationed at an eastern lookout post used primarily by Firewatch volunteers. Around 3 a.m., she swore she heard a single sharp whistle echo across the forest basin, Not a bird, not wind. It was rhythmic. 2 short bursts followed by silence. She noted it in the log, then hiked down to investigate, lighting the woods with a flood lamp. But there was nothing there. No response, no movement. Authorities filed it as an anomaly. Could have been another team member, could have been an owl, could have been nothing. But something about the report stuck. In the weeks that followed, Dana kept asking about it. Whistles. Had there been others? Was it Morse code? Could it have been a signal? Rangers checked surrounding logs. No other team had reported making any whistle calls. No civilians admitted to being near that basin. And the area in question was already swept twice. Still, with nothing else to chase, the lead fell away. By the end of the first week, the official search was scaled back. From 80 personnel, the operation dropped to a skeleton crew of 20 rotating in and out of the perimeter. Media interest began fading. Flyers curled at the edges. Volunteers returned to their routines. But for the Lively family, the forest had taken on a new role. It was no longer just a place of peace or memory. It was a void, a space where 2 sons had walked in and never walked out. And no one, not even the most experienced trackers, could explain how. What no one knew yet was that someone else had been in those woods that week. Not a rescuer, not a friend, just a man with a rifle and a reason to stay quiet. And it would take almost 5 years before anyone knew what he saw. It was a quiet Sunday in mid-April when 2 through hikers, college seniors from Tennessee on a spring break trek, reported something unusual. They had gone slightly off the marked trail to chase a viewpoint rumored to overlook a hidden ravine. About 12 miles from the last confirmed location of Aaron and Jacob Lively, they came upon a steep slope littered with pine needles and shale. There, glinting just beyond a patch of moss, was a cracked digital wristwatch. At first, they thought nothing of it. Lost gear was common. But the initials JL were faintly etched into the underside of the strap with what looked like a knife tip. They turned it in at the next ranger station without fanfare. What happened next reignited the entire investigation. The watch was confirmed within 48 hours as belonging to Jacob. It matched purchase records and photos on his mother's phone from Christmas the previous year. But it held no answers. There was no blood, no dirt smudges, no torn strap, just a crack across the face and signs of prolonged water exposure. Investigators swabbed for prints, none found, not even partials. The battery had long since died. The only thing forensic analysts could say with confidence was that it hadn't been there for more than a few months. The glass would have clouded with moss otherwise. The area where it was found was outside the original search grid, deep enough and remote enough that it had been deprioritized early on. That section of the forest wasn't commonly used by hikers due to unstable terrain and poor visibility. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints. No torn clothing, no hair or skin caught in branches. And yet, the presence of the watch raised an immediate question. How had it traveled that far from the boys' last known location? If they'd made it that deep, why was there no sign of Jacob or his body anywhere near it? The slope where the watch was found led down to a dry creek bed littered with large stones and deadfall. The incline was jagged and treacherous, but not impassable. A misstep there could cause injury, even death. Rangers descended carefully, marking paths and checking for bone fragments or personal effects. Nothing. Not even a candy wrapper. It was as if the watch had been dropped there on purpose. That possibility began to shift the investigation's tone. Quietly, some began to explore an alternative theory, one that suggested the boys hadn't been lost or attacked, that maybe, just maybe, they had disappeared on purpose. It wasn't a popular idea within the family, but it gained traction inside law enforcement circles. And it wasn't without precedent. Cases of voluntary vanishings among experienced hikers, especially young men, were rare, but they existed. Most often tied to ideology, survivalist interests, or psychological strain. Then came a digital discovery that added fuel to the suspicion. Investigators revisiting the twins' browser history and cached posts uncovered something unusual. About 3 weeks before the disappearance, Aaron had posted anonymously in an obscure wilderness prep forum. The screen name was traced to a secondary email linked to his old school account. The post read, Anyone have experience with deep woods shelters? Not on maps. Need access point with low traffic, no cell. Preferably in Appalachians. Looking for survival practice, not camping. No rescue involved. The post had gone largely unnoticed at the time. Now it took center stage. When questioned, friends said Aaron had always been fascinated by off-grid living, but never acted on it. Jacob, by contrast, was more grounded, interested in environmental science, trail preservation, maybe grad school. They weren't loners. They didn't isolate. But Aaron had recently taken to reading survival books and was known to spend hours drawing terrain maps from memory. One friend recalled Aaron joking once, "You know, we could disappear for a month and no one would find us unless we wanted them to." At the time, it felt like a fantasy. After the watch turned up, it felt like a clue. The FBI behavioral team reviewed Aaron's digital footprint and flagged multiple searches in the months leading up to the trip. Long-term shelter food storage, Appalachian off-trail access, how long to survive on filtered creek water, and air patrol blind spots. It wasn't proof of intent, but it painted a profile. It also raised a disturbing possibility that only one twin might have been aware of a plan to disappear. The family rejected the theory outright. Dana told reporters, "They wouldn't do that to us, not even as a test, and Jacob would never agree to something like that." But investigators couldn't ignore the digital trail or the growing discrepancy between Aaron's planning behavior and Jacob's lack of corresponding searches. Still, one fact held everything back. The watch was found alone. Not near a campsite, not near remains, no gear, no tools, no secondary item to suggest a shelter had existed. If this was a misdirection, it was meticulously done. If it was an accident, it was an isolated one. Either way, it pulled attention further south, into a sector of the forest no one had seriously considered. The idea of a twin theory began to circulate behind closed doors. That one led, one followed, that one disappeared, and the other got hurt trying to stop it. The psychology of twins, shared risk, mirrored behavior, dependent choices, was dissected in profiles and case notes. But without a second item, a second clue, or a body, it was all conjecture. Still, a new search sector was drawn. 12 miles southeast, just below the ridgeline where the watch had rested. What no one knew yet was that someone else had visited that ridge before the hikers ever found the watch. And he hadn't picked it up, he had left it there, for a reason. By early May, the active search for Aaron and Jacob Lively had been reduced to irregular weekend sweeps, mostly volunteers and retired rangers unwilling to give up. The discovery of Jacob's watch had shifted the case into a wider radius, but with no follow-up evidence, even that lead had stalled. Authorities, pressed for progress, took a different approach. If the forest wasn't giving up its secrets, maybe the maps would. Detectives requested the twins' original printout itinerary and gear bag from evidence storage. Inside one of the waterproof folders was a trail map, faded, creased, marked in red ink. It showed standard hiking routes, campsites, and elevation changes. But someone, likely Aaron, had circled a point along the southeastern quadrant. It wasn't part of the marked trail system. It wasn't near the creek or even close to where Jacob's watch was found. It sat in the white space between two known ridges. And next to it, scribbled in the margin, were two words: "Try cut." No one on the current team knew what it meant. The notation had been overlooked during the early search, likely dismissed as unrelated. But now, with the official investigation thin on leads, it was all they had. A local historian with a focus on Appalachian cartography was brought in. His name was Nolan Jessup, retired, once employed by the National Park Service. He wore glasses thick as a compass and carried more forest lore in his head than GPS units ever could. When he saw the map, he didn't hesitate. "They're talking about the cut," he said. "It's not on any modern records, but it used to be an access trail for moonshiners back in the 30s. Almost no one talks about it now." He unfolded his own hand-drawn topographic chart and traced the circled point. "This here leads into a ravine system that eventually dead ends into limestone wall. No way out, but back. It was shut down in the 60s, overgrown. Erosion wiped out most of it, but it used to be a real path." Detectives asked if anyone still used it. Nolan shook his head. Too narrow, too steep, and it leads to nowhere. That phrase, leads to nowhere, stuck with the team. The idea that the boys might have gone there, intentionally or not, redefined the shape of the mystery. It wasn't just about vanishing, it was about where they vanished to. On May 11th, a small unit of 4 rangers, 2 cadaver dogs, and Nolan Jessup made their way into the region referred to as the Cut. It wasn't marked on any modern GPS, so they had to rely on elevation contours and Nolan's memory. The terrain was brutal. Downed trees crisscrossed the path like barricades. Tangled rhododendrons choked every step. Visibility was poor, even at noon. Within an hour, the group split up into a staggered line, each member within shouting distance. They found rusted tin cans, a broken boot sole, even a collapsed hunting blind, remnants of long past use, but no sign of the lively twins, not a thread, not a bone, not a boot print. The dogs didn't react once. The Cut itself, if it ever was a proper trail, had degraded into a trench between hills, narrow, shadowed, and silent. Jessup called it geologically wrong. The walls on either side were limestone, but stained dark in vertical streaks, like rain hadn't dried there in years. It spooked one of the junior rangers enough to ask to head back. No one argued. Despite the lack of findings, the search report filed that night included one strange note. Near the end of the Cut, where the terrain curved back toward the limestone drop-off, one of the rangers swore he heard a metallic sound, not an animal, not the wind, just a short single clink, like something brushing against a canteen or belt buckle. When they searched the area, they found nothing, just leaves and silence. The report labeled it auditory contamination, most likely echo or nerves. Still, the team marked the area with orange flagging tape and submitted GPS coordinates for future follow-up. But that second trip never happened. Budget constraints, priorities. And the absence of physical evidence led the department to quietly reclassify the Lively case from active missing to inactive, pending new evidence. By June, it was back to silence. For the family, that shift felt like abandonment. Dana stopped speaking to the lead investigator. Roy began calling state legislators, demanding more patrols. They kept posting flyers, kept handing out water bottles with their sons' faces printed on the labels at trail events. But the response was different now. People didn't stop to ask questions. They nodded quietly, took the flyer, and walked away. The Lively name was becoming a ghost story. The case, a warning. Don't go off trail. Don't follow maps that aren't yours. But back in that ravine, in the final stretch of the Cut, the orange flagging tape began to fade. By fall, the wind had taken most of it. The tape vanished, the sound stopped, and no one returned. Not until someone did. Not law enforcement, not family. Just a man, alone, walking through that trench with something heavy in his pack. He didn't call it the Cut. He had another name for it, one that wasn't written on any map. And when asked years later why he went there at all, he said simply, because that's where they went quiet. By the time the second anniversary passed, Aaron and Jacob's names were no longer in headlines. The search teams had long been reassigned. Tips stopped coming in. Even the laminated flyers had faded under sun and storm, curling at the corners, colors washed to gray. Most families would have given in to the silence, accepted the reality that some answers never come. But Dana Lively didn't. She developed a rhythm, a ritual that no one asked her to do, but that she couldn't stop doing. On the 17th of every month, she drove her aging sedan up to the Springer Mountain trailhead alone. She parked in the same gravel patch where her husband once waited with a thermos and a silent phone. She walked exactly a quarter mile into the forest and placed 2 Ziploc bags under the same mossy log near the first marker post. Inside each bag, 1 pair of clean wool socks, a handful of protein bars, a water purification straw, and a folded piece of paper sealed in duct tape. The notes always said the same thing. I love you. I believe in you. Come home. She never told anyone how long she stayed there each time. Sometimes it was minutes, other times hours. She didn't camp, she didn't stray, just sat against the log, listening. The act became less about hope and more about tethering, holding a line even if no one was on the other end. It caught the attention of a local filmmaker, a man who had once covered the original disappearance for regional news. He reached out after seeing Dana's car parked at the trailhead in mid-January, engine running, frost thick on the windshield. She agreed to be filmed on the condition that he didn't ask the usual questions. No theories, no forensics, just the story of what a mother does when the world stops looking. In the documentary segment, never aired on national outlets, but passed quietly around hiker forums, Dana sits on a rock beside the trail. Her eyes are steady. Her hands are folded. She says, "If they're alive, they're cold. If they're dead, they're waiting to be named. Either way, they need something left behind." The camera doesn't move. Her voice doesn't waver. It's not grief anymore. It's something more patient and more dangerous. Months later, a hiker posted anonymously in an Appalachian Facebook group about finding something strange. He'd been doing a solo hike near a southern bend, far from the main trail, when he noticed a plastic bag propped carefully against the base of a tree. It was sealed, dry, weighted with a rock. Inside, 2 pairs of socks, 3 nutrition bars, a small water filter, and a handwritten note folded 4 times. He didn't open it. He took a picture, posted it, and hiked on. The photo made its way to a moderator who had followed the Lively case for years. He reached out to Dana. She confirmed it was hers, the handwriting, the contents, the duct tape. But the location was wrong, 30 miles from where she left it. It was deep into unmarked terrain, within half a mile of a gated property line bordering private hunting land. No official trail crossed through it. No rescue team had ever swept that section. It was unclear how the bag had gotten there. She'd never placed one that far out, and yet there it was, untouched, perfectly preserved. The moderator returned to the spot 2 weeks later with a GPS tracker and a printout of old forestry maps. The terrain was rugged, quiet, with no cell reception and no fresh boot prints. The bag was gone. Whether taken by an animal, another hiker, or someone else entirely, no one could say. That incident sparked whispers again. Was one of the boys alive? Had they been living off-grid? Was Aaron's survival obsession more serious than anyone knew? Online sleuths revived the lone twin theory, speculating that Jacob may have died early and Aaron had stayed hidden, moving supplies, avoiding cameras, leaving markers. Others believed someone else had found the bag and moved it, either as a tribute or something more sinister. Dana didn't entertain those theories publicly. When asked, she said only, "If they touched it, I'm glad they did. It means they're still real." She kept bringing the bags. She kept writing the notes. She adjusted her ritual slightly, leaving one bag at the trailhead and another, miles south, near a hollowed birch tree she once saw Aaron lean against as a boy. Roy had long stopped accompanying her, not out of disagreement but necessity. The waiting had aged him, hollowed him out. He said it felt like watching someone dig through ashes every month expecting to find fire, but he never told her to stop. They had made space for how differently grief lived inside them. In time, other hikers began leaving things too. Notes, ribbons, trinkets. Someone hung a small wooden sign along the trail with the carved words, "Still out there." No one took credit for it. Rangers left it up. It wasn't official, but it belonged now. The forest, once a place of answers and markers, had become a cathedral of uncertainty. And yet, for Dana, the repetition was its own kind of message. If her boys were gone, this was proof they had once existed. Proof that someone kept looking when the map stopped helping. What she didn't know, what no one did, was that someone else had seen those bags too. Not a hiker, not a ranger, just a man watching from deep in the tree line. He knew where the boys had gone. He also knew why one of them hadn't come back. By the end of 2020, the Lively case had become more memory than mystery. Something spoken of with quiet tones in local gear shops and ranger stations, mentioned occasionally by trail guides when cautioning new hikers not to go off-grid. But in late November, deep into a hunting season that had seen record snowfall and low visibility, one man found something that pulled the story back into daylight. His name was Ray Klein, a 61-year-old retired electrician and lifelong bow hunter who'd been walking those woods since before GPS was standard. And what he saw that day, tucked behind a curtain of frozen brush, would change the case forever. Ray had gone out early, chasing sign across a heavily wooded tract just beyond the official trail boundary, a restricted area where hunting was technically off limits, though many locals ignored the signs. He was moving quietly through the undergrowth when he caught a flash of blue-gray fabric through the trees. At first, he thought it was another hunter, maybe careless, maybe lost, but the color was off, too faded, too still. He approached cautiously, expecting maybe a discarded tarp or old hunting blind. What he found instead was a crude shelter, built into the side of a low embankment and nearly invisible from more than 20 feet away. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Camouflage netting, now brittle and frayed, had been strung across the opening, weighed down by stones and branches. Inside were 2 sleeping bags, one unzipped and flattened, the other partially bald near the far corner. Between them sat a long-dead fire pit, ringed with blackened rocks and filled with leaves. What caught Ray's attention, though, was the jacket. It was torn across the left sleeve and crumpled beside a broken plastic thermos. The color matched the one Jacob Lively had been wearing the day he disappeared. Ray didn't move anything. He backed away, took a photo with his flip phone, and left the woods in silence. He waited a full day before calling it in. When investigators arrived at the scene with Ray leading the way, they moved with surgical precision. The site was immediately sealed and processed with portable lights and forensic kits. Everything was bagged: the sleeping bags, the fire pit debris, the netting, the torn jacket, even the thermos cracked in 2, its inner lining stained with something dry and reddish-brown. Preliminary field tests were inconclusive. Could be blood, could be something else. Only the lab would know. But the jacket told them enough. A DNA match confirmed within 72 hours. Jacob Lively. The first physical confirmation in over 2.5 years. It wasn't clothing worn by someone who had passed through. It was Jacob's, and it had remained undisturbed for years. The shelter was his, or theirs. The media caught wind quickly. Local news ran the headline, "Lively case reopened after discovery of hidden shelter." Reporters circled the family. Donna declined interviews. Roy didn't answer the door. But in an email later released through their lawyer, the family said only, "We're grateful for the new attention. We never stopped believing they were out there." The shelter was analyzed in full. The fire pit showed evidence of repeated use: wood ash layers, charred food particles, even fragments of a burned paperback novel. The sleeping bags were commercially sold but had been modified, one with stitched insulation, the other with patches cut from what looked like thermal underwear. The thermos tested positive for degraded human blood, but with no intact DNA, it was impossible to match. It wasn't enough for confirmation, but it pointed to injury. Ray's involvement, however, raised complications. He refused public comment beyond his initial statement. When asked why he had never reported the area before, he simply said, "Didn't know what I was looking at. Thought it was trash." Privately, investigators believed differently. Ray had been hunting that tract for decades. He knew every deer run, every game trail. He'd likely seen the shelter years ago and ignored it, maybe out of fear, maybe because he didn't want to be caught in a restricted zone. But now, the discovery placed him at the heart of a long-dead fire and a torn piece of truth. Authorities re-interviewed Ray twice. Both times he gave consistent answers. No, he never touched the jacket. No, he never entered the shelter before that day. No, he didn't see anyone nearby. But something in his tone suggested hesitation, like a man balancing guilt he couldn't name. When pressed about any prior sightings or odd encounters in the woods during the original search years earlier, he went quiet. Then he asked for a lawyer. What mattered, though, was that the shelter existed, that someone had built it, that someone had stayed. The theory that the twins had staged their disappearance resurfaced again, but now with added layers. Had they tried to survive? Had one of them been injured? And if so, why had no one returned for help? The presence of 2 bags meant both had likely made it there, but only one jacket was found, only one blood smear, and no personal items beyond that. Still, the reemergence of physical evidence reignited public interest. Online forums lit up. Amateur sleuths remapped the area. The location of the shelter, less than 3 miles from the long-abandoned cut, suggested movement, direction, a plan. But that trail led into land no longer monitored by rangers, bordering property lines owned by private hunting clubs and generational families who didn't welcome outsiders. For investigators, the discovery raised new questions, but one was louder than the rest. Had someone else known about the shelter all along? And if so, what had they seen? When the shelter was discovered, the lively case transformed from a cold file into an open wound. New forensic sweeps followed. Volunteers returned to the trail. Donna resumed her monthly drops with a renewed urgency. But while the public focused on what was found, investigators began focusing on what hadn't been, specifically what Ray Klein may have seen but never shared. Quietly, in the spring of 2021, they brought him back in. This time, the conversation was different. No press, no official statement, just a sit-down with two agents from the State Bureau who had read between the lines of Ray's original testimony. He described the shelter with precision, but he had also arrived with knowledge that couldn't have come from a brief glimpse. He knew about the jacket before forensics confirmed it. He described the inside layout more clearly than his grainy cell phone photo allowed. There was something too clean about it, too prepared. Then, a local tip changed the tone completely. A 17-year-old boy posted anonymously in a backwoods hunting forum, claiming Ray Klein once showed him a real human tooth he'd found inside a boot deep in the forest. The post was quickly taken down, but not before someone archived it and forwarded it to the local sheriff's office. The teen was tracked down, and while reluctant, admitted that 2 summers earlier, before the shelter had been reported, Ray had brought an old leather boot to his grandfather's property where they were dressing a deer. Inside, he said, was what looked like a cracked molar. Ray had passed it around like a hunting trophy before quietly taking it back and walking off with the boot. Confronted with this, Ray didn't deny the story. He claimed the tooth was fake, said it was part of an old prank he used to pull. But investigators didn't buy it, and when asked why he hadn't mentioned it during the initial report, his answers turned vague. That's when the questioning turned to digital evidence. Ray had said he never entered the shelter, never moved anything, never saw any paper or writing. But during a scan of his old flip phone, submitted voluntarily during a previous inquiry, technicians had flagged several deleted JPEG files, fragments recoverable through forensic reconstruction. One of them, partially overwritten, displayed a blurred image of a fire-damaged journal page held against someone's knee. The timestamp placed it in early 2019, nearly 2 years before the shelter was reported. The handwriting was rough but legible. The ink had bled at the edges from water damage, but the message was chilling. "He's hurt. I can't move him. No one will believe me." Dated October 12, 2018, nearly 6 months after the boys had disappeared, Ray claimed he deleted the photo because he assumed it was just junk paper, nothing important. He said he didn't keep the journal, didn't read the rest. But now, his credibility was eroding fast. Investigators believed he'd found the shelter much earlier and had kept it to himself, for reasons he wouldn't or couldn't explain. Whether out of fear, guilt, or a desire to avoid trespassing charges, he had sat on a critical piece of evidence while the family continued to search. The journal, as described in metadata and reconstruction scans, had been fire-scorched on one edge, suggesting a failed attempt to destroy it. Whether it was Aaron's or Jacob's remained unclear. There were no fingerprints, no additional photos, just that single, grainy image of one page held against the light. But the language suggested urgency and isolation. He's hurt. Which one? And why couldn't he be moved? The page's date now became its own revelation. October 12, 2018. That meant at least one of the brothers was alive for over 6 months after the official search had ended, long after the news cycle had moved on, long after most believed the boys were gone. And somewhere during that time, one of them was injured badly enough that the other believed help wasn't coming. Not because it couldn't, but because no one would believe the truth. That language, "no one will believe me," sent a ripple through the case files. What could they have encountered out there that required explanation? What decision had been made that demanded secrecy? It no longer looked like an accident. It looked like containment. And then there was Ray. A man with hunting access to restricted woods. A man who stumbled on a shelter he may have already known about. A man who found a journal and tried to destroy it, or at the very least hide it. He wasn't being accused of a crime, not yet, but he wasn't a bystander anymore. The page was authenticated, and the photo was archived as the first verifiable written message from the Lively brothers post-disappearance. Dana, when shown a printout of the photo, said nothing for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "Jacob's spelling was neater. That's Aaron's." So now the story changed again. One twin alive, one twin hurt, a makeshift shelter, a smear of blood, a man who knew more than he admitted. And somewhere out there, maybe even deeper in the woods, the rest of that journal still waiting to be found, if it hadn't already been buried. The next phase of the investigation wouldn't involve helicopters or dog teams. It would involve old hunting maps, private land permits, and hard questions asked at quiet doors. Because someone had seen more, and someone had taken something they weren't ready to give back. Ray Klein had stayed silent for nearly 3 years. He gave interviews when asked, answered questions with enough consistency to pass as credible, and nodded along when investigators suggested he'd simply stumbled across the shelter by chance. But by summer of 2021, the weight of the timeline, the inconsistencies in his story, and the recovered photo of the journal page backed him into a corner. Under quiet pressure from state investigators and faced with possible obstruction charges, Ray finally asked to speak, on his terms, without cameras, without press. What he confessed behind that closed door shifted the entire understanding of what happened to Aaron and Jacob Lively. He started by admitting the biggest lie. He hadn't discovered the shelter in 2020. He had seen it the day it was built, March 17, 2018, the very day the twins vanished. Ray had been deep in a restricted section of forest, bow hunting out of season on land he wasn't supposed to enter. He was using an old access point known to local hunters, just off a defunct fire road that paralleled the abandoned cut. Mid-afternoon, he heard voices. Not casual conversation, shouting, urgent, panicked. Ray said he moved quietly uphill, thinking at first it was another poacher or maybe a ranger. But what he saw, through binoculars, froze him in place. 2 young men emerged from the tree line into a small clearing near a shallow embankment. One, taller, moving quickly, was supporting the other, who was clearly injured. He was limping heavily, dragging his left leg. They had gear, but it was slung loosely, as if dropped and repacked in a hurry. Ray watched as they began assembling a crude lean-to, using fallen limbs and a poncho for cover. They worked with speed, no hesitation. It looked practiced. He said they stayed low, barely spoke, and once the shelter took shape, the uninjured twin, whom Ray now believed was Aaron, started a fire with a striker. The injured one, Jacob, remained huddled inside, holding his side. Ray couldn't tell the extent of the injury, but said he saw blood when Aaron helped him remove his jacket. Ray watched for hours, he said. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. The sun dipped behind the ridge and the temperature dropped. He expected them to call for help, use a beacon, or light a signal, but they didn't. They just sat close to the fire, shared water, passed what looked like a small notebook between them. That was the first time he saw the journal. It flickered in the firelight. He didn't know what they were writing, but they were writing something. At some point after nightfall, Ray quietly slipped away. He never saw them leave, never saw them break down camp. He assumed they were waiting for morning. He could have helped. He could have walked straight down the hill, announced himself, called it in. But he didn't. When asked why, Ray stared at the floor. "I was trespassing," he said. "I had a bow, tags were expired, and that area's off limits. One ranger sees me, that's jail time." But it wasn't just about the law. It was about fear. He wasn't sure what he had witnessed, 2 kids in trouble or something stranger. He convinced himself they'd be fine, that they'd hike out by morning, that someone else would find them. But no one did. Ray admitted he returned to the shelter site weeks later, this time in daylight. The shelter was still there, but the fire pit was cold, covered in ash and leaves. Only one sleeping bag remained. A jacket was buried beneath brush, torn at the sleeve. The journal, partially burned, had been left behind. He said he panicked, took the boot, took the page, thought maybe he'd turn it in later if it mattered, but he never did. When asked if he saw any sign of struggle, Ray said no. No blood trails, no bodies, no evidence of foul play. Just the feeling that something had gone wrong and been left to rot. Investigators recorded every word. The confession changed everything. It meant Aaron and Jacob hadn't vanished without a trace. They had made camp. One had been injured. They were trying to survive. And someone saw them while there was still time to help, and chose to walk away. The admission sparked public outrage. The Lively family released a statement through their attorney, calling the confession a cruel confirmation of what we feared most, that they were left when they could have been saved. Dana declined all interviews. She returned to the trailhead the next morning and stayed there for 6 hours, sitting on the same rock where she'd once left her first note. Ray Klein wasn't charged with a crime. His trespassing had long passed the statute of limitations. And without evidence he directly caused harm or interfered with a rescue, there was little prosecutors could pursue. But he was ostracized. The hunting forums banned his name. The town where he lived stopped inviting him to local events. His truck was vandalized twice before he finally moved north. Still, his confession unlocked a final corridor in the case timeline. Aaron and Jacob had reached that clearing. They had built shelter. One had been hurt, one had written a message, and both had been alive past sundown on March 17th. What remained unknown, what still hovered in the woods, was what happened after that fire went cold, and why one of them never made it out, nearly 5 years after Aaron and Jacob Lively vanished into the Appalachian woods. A winter that had started like any other ended with the one thing the case had never yielded: proof. It came not through accident, but through persistence. After Ray Klein's confession in 2021, the cold case unit at the State Bureau had quietly resumed investigations behind closed doors. No media, no pressers, just a team of forensic specialists and field investigators working off a grid of coordinates Ray had reluctantly provided, along with the burned journal page recovered from his phone. In January 2023, during a low snow season that exposed long-hidden terrain, a 6-person team returned to the area near the original shelter. They weren't looking for trails anymore. They were looking for drop-offs, sinkholes, natural traps that could conceal something 100 searchers might have passed over. And that's exactly what they found. Roughly 200 yards southwest of the shelter site, beneath a cluster of wind-fallen trees and heavy brush, was a depression in the forest floor, natural but deep. At first glance it looked like a dry ravine clogged with dead branches. But beneath the surface was something else, a hollow carved by centuries of water runoff, now packed with ice. Not snow, not melt, ice, compacted, preserved, frozen in layers from past winters that never fully thawed under the tree cover. Thermal drones had missed it before. Dogs had never caught scent through the compacted debris. But this time, the team brought penetrating radar, and it lit up immediately. The first item recovered was a shredded piece of thermal blanket. Then the heel of a boot, then a tangle of nylon that had once been part of a sleeping bag. It took 12 hours of careful excavation before they found the body. It was curled on its side, wedged into the bottom of the sinkhole beneath collapsed wood and ice slabs. There was no obvious trauma beyond a severely fractured femur, snapped above the knee, the bone misaligned and healed incorrectly, suggesting the injury had happened long before death. There were no defensive wounds. No skull fractures, no signs of weapon trauma or restraint. It was determined to be male, late teens, approximate death window between late 2018 and early 2019. The dental match was confirmed the following week: Jacob Lively. For the family, it was the first definitive answer. The boy who had vanished with a backpack and a plan was now a body in a hole, wrapped in the same emergency blanket he'd packed himself. There was no foul play, no struggle. Just a bone-breaking fall in an unforgiving place. But the discovery raised a darker implication. The shelter, the journal page, the supplies, all suggested Jacob had not been alone. Someone had helped him build a fire, dress the wound, keep warm. The fracture was severe. No one with that break walks even 100 yards, let alone gathers wood or fends off cold. The coroner estimated that Jacob may have survived for weeks, possibly even months, with the injury. meaning someone had fed him, moved him, protected him, until they didn't. Aaron, the second twin, the missing half, was nowhere to be found. No bones, no clothing, no trace. But within the charred remnants of the journal recovered by Ray, forensic analysts found another legible line, faint but intact, on the backside of the original page. It read, "I kept him warm. I used everything. I'm going farther now. If I don't come back, it's because I couldn't." The note was dated January 8th, 2019, nearly 10 months after the boys had disappeared. If the date was real, it meant Aaron had stayed with his brother long after the world stopped looking, had tried to care for him through a mountain winter with no supplies beyond what they could salvage, had written messages to no one, burning most of them to avoid detection. And then, at some point, when he realized his brother couldn't be saved and no one was coming, he walked away. Where he went, no one could say. The search for Aaron resumed immediately after Jacob's body was recovered, but the forest remained silent. The immediate area yielded no second body, no second set of prints, no gear. Just evidence of a prolonged stay, fish bones, stripped bark, an improvised water catch basin built from tarp scraps. These weren't panic decisions. They were survival choices, calculated, intentional. Aaron had known what he was doing, which made his disappearance even more haunting. If he'd died out there, why hadn't his body turned up? If he'd tried to hike out, why wasn't he found along the fire roads, the riverbeds, the access trails? It was as if he'd vanished again, this time not as a twin in distress, but as a ghost with nothing left to return to. The journal gave only one more clue. A closing line in different handwriting, found scrawled at the bottom of the final page in what looked like charcoal. "He's warm now. I'm going farther." That message, and its choice of tense, puzzled everyone. Was it written after Jacob died or before? Did farther mean rescue? Or did it mean hiding? No one could answer. But now, for the first time, the story had a body. A confirmed truth. Jacob hadn't drowned. He hadn't run. He hadn't just vanished. He had been buried in ice, and someone, likely his brother, had made sure he didn't die alone. But the forest still held one silence too deep to thaw, one twin still out there. Somewhere. Ray Klein had been the last thread in a story everyone thought had ended in silence. For years he'd claimed he discovered the shelter by chance, that he'd stumbled on an old campsite, took a few photos and walked away. But after Jacob's body was found in the ice trap, and forensic teams uncovered pieces of what looked like a long, hidden goodbye, the pressure returned. Quietly, in late 2023, Ray agreed to one last interview with investigators. No cameras, no recordings, just the truth, finally. He said it happened days after he first saw the boys build the shelter. The weather had dropped fast, nights were freezing, snow was light but constant. Ray had returned to the woods to check a trail camera he'd left illegally, deep in restricted hunting territory. He hadn't planned to go back near the shelter, but from the ridge he spotted movement, slow, limping, almost crawling. Then he saw him. Aaron. Alone, barefoot, shirt torn, lips cracked. His face looked raw, like it hadn't seen warmth in days. He wasn't carrying anything, no gear, no food, just himself. He collapsed near a tree. Ray said he rushed down, gave him water and food. Aaron drank like he hadn't had anything in days. He tried to speak, but his voice was shredded. Ray said he caught one thing. "He's gone." Ray told him to stay put, said he'd go get help, told him not to move, but Ray never came back. He left the woods and drove home in silence. He told himself someone else would find the boy, that it wasn't his job, that he couldn't risk being caught trespassing. But deep down, he knew exactly what he'd done, and what he hadn't. For nearly 5 years, he told no one, not the police, not his family. He watched the searches on the news, watched Dana stand at that trailhead with her plastic bags of socks and protein bars, and still, he said nothing. But his confession gave investigators one final place to look, a stretch of forest just past the shelter near an old ridge. In October 2023, they found a flat stone marked with a hand-carved J. Beneath it, a shallow grave, a skeleton curled into itself. No signs of foul play, No wounds, just starvation, exposure, and cold. The dental records confirmed it was Aaron. The coroner said he likely died weeks, maybe even months after Jacob. He'd buried his brother, left a message, and waited until he couldn't anymore. Aaron hadn't vanished. He'd been there the whole time, waiting, hoping someone would keep their word. But the only man who saw him ran. No charges were filed against Ray. His failure, though unforgivable to many, wasn't criminal. But it was enough. Enough to end the story with what the case never had: the truth. Two brothers tried to survive together. One was hurt, the other stayed. They built a shelter, left messages, asked for help. And when it finally came, it turned around and walked away. Not out of cruelty, just fear. And that was all it took.